Our guest today is Laurie Olivier, the CEO and co-founder of LifeQ, a health platform that integrates with all manner of consumer wearables, helping to spot chronic disease early and encouraging lifestyle change before it's too late. Their platform can aggregate and collate over 200 different biometrics. Health gadgets are here to stay, so our conversation centers around what can we meaningfully do with all of this data? How are simple wearable devices assisting both health coaches and their clients in achieving greater health and wellness? And how can coaches of end-user health consumers take personalized action based on the readings they get from their wearables? This is where coaching and technology meet. We hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Laurie Olivier of LifeQ. Hi, I'm Erin Power.
And I'm Laura Rupsis.
We're certified health coaches, and this is Health Coach Radio.
This podcast is about the art, science, and business of health coaching.
We share our insider tips to help you become a better coach and entrepreneur.
And we interview expert guests to discover how they've made it in this growing field.
It's time for health coaches to make an impact.
It's time for Health Coach Radio. All right. What a special guest. Laurie, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Hi, Laura. Thanks for the welcome. And Erin, nice to say hello to you as well. All good. It's a very sunny day here in Georgia. And I think it's a sunny day sometimes in other parts of the world, but I know often we have the rainy ones. All good. Thank you. And yourself.
Yeah, fantastic. So we were just talking before we hit record about all the cool things we can talk about. We're going to talk about something that doesn't come up all that often on here in terms of using data and wearables to help direct holistic health. And so do you mind giving our audience some backstory on you, kind of who you are, how you're here, how you develop this expertise?
Right. So first of all, I'm actually originally from South Africa. I'm now living in the US. I'm, by background, sort of coming from the big corporate world, like I think the two of you as well at some stage. I've been on the board of a Fortune 500 company in my young days, if you believe it or not, but sort of like one of the sub-boards, which is the industrial board of a company called Anglo American. Been in venture capital since the 1980s. Well, that's a long time. And then been involved with a lot of startups in the health field as well as other fields. And maybe sort of like at the end of your career, you think you have to leave something behind. So I jumped in to become an entrepreneur myself.
Nice.
And I started with some co-founders, a company called LifeQ. And LifeQ is a sort of health platform that we built on top of everyday consumer wearables. It's not to turn a wearable into a medical device, because one of the key themes or focus for us is preventative health, consumer health, focus on chronic disease and how to spot it early and try to guide people to use lifestyle medicine to make some changes. And where some people would not have those tools to help connect them to either healthcare professionals or even loved ones or other people, which could help them to make changes, because this is not easy. It's not like taking a pill for an acute disease. Chronic disease typically is something which is in the habit. And then the question is, how do you deal with that? Because that's not simple. And then more specifically, how do you get the best bang for your buck? How do you get the best sort of results for your input? Because I think that's where many people lose it. They realize they have an issue. They say they have a metabolic disorder. They want to do something about it, but at some stage, they just, it's like almost people wanting to lose weight, and they just, something happens. I think I heard you once said in an interview that, you have people at the gym. They go on vacation. When they go on vacation, when they came back, they forgot that they were at the gym. It's so hard to restart things. So what is sticky? What do you do? How do you gamify things to make it easy for the consumers? But at the same token, how do you, the one very key element which we focus on, and I think you guys too, is that lately, much more power is in the hands of the individual themselves about their health. The question that they can just leave it for somebody else to worry about. And how do you empower them? How do you give them the right tools without drowning them or without making them anxious about their situation? All of these things are not trivial, but I think that's where we focus on, and that's a little bit my background. So I grew up on the Botswana border. I grew up without electricity, no TV. We had one radio, small radio in the house, and whether you believe it or not, I did my 12th grade with candlelight, not with electrical lights. So yeah.
Wow.
They are.
Come a long way. Now you're in the kind of this tech space.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's so interesting. So LifeQ is a platform. You are not in the wearables space yourself, but it's sort of collating, amalgamating data from consumer wearables.
Yes, and I think a very specific nuance on that is, unlike there are some companies which are sort of like aggregators and then doing some analytics on aggregated data. So they just take data from an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or Garmin, whatever. The thing is that if you really want to do precision health and you want to go to tune into health and get that extra edge, fidelity of information and consistency of information is very important. So what we do is we integrate with some wearable device companies. So we are our technology will be managing the sensing into the body.
Oh.
And then there's certain information that we then provide to the consumer electronics company, which they provide to consumers. These are things which heart rate, breathing rate, SpO2, heart rate variability, things like that. But then there's a whole suite of different information, which is more health-centric, which we derive as well, which becomes, very important if you want to see whether a person is in the early onset of different types of chronic disease, which we all know is around about 85% of all healthcare costs we can track back to chronic disease. And therefore, and we all know that when you get to it, it's often too late. You have to do something about it early. Although I think we can certainly demonstrate that even if you are serious about it in your later days, like 50s or 60s, you can still do something meaningful about it, but you often can't totally reverse it.
Right. Okay, interesting. So the nuance, if I'm understanding correctly, is you're integrating with the wearables and actually collecting. So out of the box, the Aura Ring will track your heart rate variability, your sleep, what else did I can't remember. I lost mine at the gym. So you're ready. But are you saying, you integrate and you can collect you can sort of, just gather other information?
Yeah, let me give you some examples. Let's say, for instance, on your heart. So, if we take the pulse waveform, we can get very good data on your heart contractility, your stroke volume. As you push the blood out of your heart, the stress coming back, your main vessel compliance, your peripheral vessel resistance, hypertension, things like that, which you won't get in those other devices. And the key thing here is that it's a little bit like a camera, which you have. If you take a camera, you can change the aperture, you can change the zoom, you can change the focus. And in the same picture, which you take of a garden, you can zoom into different flowers and you can lift it out. So is there different information that we pick up from the human body by changing the lens, changing the camera on it. And therefore, most consumer electronics electronics companies, the camera is on heart rate and things like that, which is a very easy thing to see. But when you start going into if you go to the pulse waveform where you have to get every small peaklet, etc., you have to have a much more refined focus to be able to do that. And particularly if you then start moving into other systems of the body, like the endocrine system or the musculoskeletal system or the mental system, the neurodegenerative system, these systems, the type of information which you have to get from the highway. Remember, your circulatory is your highway of your body. And it's amazing how much information is actually, you pick up on that. But then you look at that, plus in context, we have other sensors, which you look at, like electrodermal sensors or, different accelerometers and things. So you look at these things in combination. So we use systems biology, which is sort of like a subset of biochemistry, to build a sort of a digital version of humans. And based upon that, then we have a sort of a total view of the human. Then based upon that, you take certain subsets of those biometrics. We generate something more than 200 biometrics from the human body. And then from those subsets, we can then inform whether very specific chronic diseases would be, in onset, all based on published data. So we are not doing new medical science. We are just leveraging existing medical science and applying new technologies on it.
Okay, so LifeIQ is a platform. Do you also have your own devices, or are you aggregating data from, are you like device agnostic and you can integrate with things that the client already feels comfortable with?
Yeah, that's exactly the point, but there's a little bit of a spin on the device agnostic. So we don't sort of aggregate just data from the APIs from existing devices. Our technology has to be in the devices. So we are in a subset. So our consumer electronics partners, covering quite a wide spectrum. We're not in all their devices. And many times people don't even know. And, because a consumer electronics company would not want you to know that somebody else is actually doing the health sensing in the device. Now, if you look at our partners collectively, they supply around about half of the world's wearables. So it's quite a huge partnership base, but we are only in limited devices. So we're not close to half the world's wearables. Let me just say that. So that's in terms of the mining of the data, where we mine the data from the body. But then the question is, the platform on top is, what do we do with the biometrics? Because, most people are, ultimately you get apps, and I get the fact that people are getting bored. You see a lot of graphs and things and a lot of data, but the whole idea is to make meaning from it.
Right.
And the problem is, to get meaning from it is you need context, and you need to sort of like, there's a few data points. Let's say, for instance, like Apple have on the Apple Watch, they use arithmetic data to see whether you have potentially AFib. So there they use one data point. But usually, if you have a collection of data points, if you go to lots of chronic diseases, you can't just look at one data point. You have to look at the whole slew of that. So in that case, just Laura, so we are device agnostic, but we are integrated in these devices. So think of this as a health operating platform that we put onto wearables, a little bit like Windows on different types of PCs. And then from there onwards, you get the same. So and then the question is, what do we do with that information? Though that goes into our cloud, and in our cloud, we build then sort of like personal, baseline profiles of humans. Everyone have a different one. And then based upon that, you get the ability to spot fine movements in the human body.
You're like device agnostic as long as the device being used is already integrated with your technology.
So we have to manage it. Give you an idea. So if you have a solution, let's use the solution which we just used, AFib. And if a cardiologist will apply a treatment like cardioversion on AFib, the device needs to know that the technology, that the solution is actually cardiology, because it needs to hunt for different information. We can't hunt for all the information all the time. The battery will never last. So there's a very intelligent communication between the device and the solution. And then inside the device, there's a very interesting communication between the brain and what's happening on the call face, where you actually sort of switch on the LEDs, change the sort of like frequency, look at different other movements in the body, combine them, have the context and decide. There's a total difference. If you take, for instance, if I want to look at the mental disorder, let's say we want to look at, acute stress versus chronic stress. So typically what you will look at is a heart rate elevation. Somebody's heart rate goes up and down. But if somebody's, stand up from the chair and the heart rate goes up and down, that's because of the chair. It's not because of a mental thing. So you need another sensor to say, hey, the person was stationary when that thing happened. And therefore, I interpret that heart rate elevation now differently. And then I go on to say, maybe now I want to look at heart rate variability. Did the heart rate variability actually drop at that time or maybe at that night, when the person sleep, so that I can see that this heart rate elevation was basically a stressor, a mental stressor, which caused being sort of sort of like evolve into a acute stress sort of like position. So you have to look at a lot of things at the same time. It is totally different than a consumer electronics company which just generate a few biometrics, and then a few people look on, there's some app companies looking at those biometrics and see what insights can they derive from those biometrics when they are available. For us, it's very, very specific and context dependent. So if you talk about fitness, which I know is also an area for you, we've seen in COVID how many elite athletes have developed microdetas. So they have heart disorders. So now you have the typical approach where people look at stress and recovery. So they look at heart rate variability or resting heart rate and sleep, and then they say, you are ready, you can just push it today. And then they put up the dial. But there's a bigger health context which you have to take into consideration. And I think this is where we come into the play. So we provide that bigger picture, in terms of, well, is it true that you can just now go and do high intensity training, or is it maybe not good for you to do zone 2, at this point in time? And by the way, if you look at your specific disease profile, we may recommend that you do your high intensity training at a different time of the day, or, because it may have a different impact. In fact, we could connect the dots even per individual to see the impact of moderate training versus disease progression, or high intensity training, or things like that. So it's a sophistication of the next level, but the consumer don't know it, fortunately. So don't worry about the complication, which I'm telling you. I'm just telling you what's happening underneath the hood.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So what is this a platform? So what I would love to draw out is how a health coach and a client can use this information effectively to help influence behaviors and choices. So LifeIQ is a platform available. Is it? I would imagine mostly watches or things that can use some sort of LED light.
Yeah, so smart watches and fitness bands. And so what we've also now started informing is a new category, which we call a health band, which will come out probably towards the end of the year for the first time, which is very much focused more on health.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit like, if you look on my arm, this
You're
is
wearing a lot of devices.
This is an Amazon Halo, for instance.
Okay.
And so a health band is closer to a thing like this. It's just a band. Whereas this, you have some smart watches. So I have quite a few of them, which I'm all testing, and we're all doing. I at some stage something like 6 or 7 on my arm. So there's many of them.
So is there an app that sort of aggregates this data? Is there a coach side versus a client side, or tell us a little bit about how?
Yeah, so we are about to launch our solution. So the first thing for us was to get integrated into the devices.
Right.
So we started in 2016 with that, and it's quite a process. You must think of it. We talk about Fortune 10 companies, Fortune 100 companies, which have to allow us into the baby room of their devices, right? So with that now done, we are busy now launching the solutions. So the solutions, for the first time, you will find a LifeQ health app alongside that of a typical device maker app. We're going to have it, first of all, for free, available in August and September, but by Q4, you will see it for the first time. Now, what will be in there for a coach? Because that's your question at this particular point in time. So the health app is, think of it like the cockpit of a pilot. Now, you have these very sophisticated, elite athlete codes. They make use of Training Peaks and all those different types of software. I think some of that's known to you. So think of this as that on steroids. So you have maybe, and I'm not exaggerating, 20 times as much data, which with analysis on that, depending on what you look at it, available. So we have dashboards which will be configured even for trainers, for medical professionals, or even for loved ones. If you're an elderly person, or which you want to monitor as a child or whatever type of thing. So those dashboards provide then the ability that you can bring to the foreground those things which are most important to you. Let's say you're a trainer, So now you want to make sure you want to focus on things like, during the day, stress and recovery, which is always very important to look at. So you look at things like heart rate variability, you look at, your resting heart rate, you look at your sleep, all the different phases of sleep, all the stuff which people typically look at. But then on top, you want to have, things like your lactate, you want to have your epoch in view all the time. You want to have a look at your VO2 max, particularly, we do it not only through protocol VO2 max, which you do on a Cosmet machine, but we look at lifestyle VO2 max. We have sub-maximal VO2 max numbers coming out of that. And then we correlate all of those numbers, and all that information is available. And then what we are doing now, so we're working, in this case, for specialized coaches, specific interpretive layers on top of that, which allow the thinking. So what you want to do is you want the coach to have higher order data available. And the best way of describing it for me is, if you think of the older days, at least my days, we had DOS before we had Windows as a software. DOS was capable. There's a lot of information, but you had to do a lot of things manually almost from that. Whereas Windows just make it so much easier. Things are much more pre-baked for you, if you'd like. And I think this is where we start moving it. So for coaches, the whole idea will be to give them the ability to monitor the person, to understand what are the sort of like guardrails which the person typically, it doesn't help that you tell a person go and do this type of training, but you know that the person is unlikely to comply. So you need to use the power of computer to see in which bands did that person actually operate all the time. And it's likely, if I make a recommendation, will actually comply with. And then also you want to do it in the context of total health, in that spectrum. And then you want to have something which can encourage the person that they've achieved goals. And, you have the usual thing, whether it's a 7-day goal, 3-day goal setting, and so forth. What we have done, which is quite interesting, is we have converted a lot of our discussion with the individuals, with the consumer or the athlete or whoever it is, in the form of bioages. Now, of course, the concept of biological age. So what we did is and we've trademarked it. If you go, bioage is a LifeQ trademark, by the way. And we have taken all-cause mortality studies with hazard ratios, and then we have converted back. Let's say if you take VO2 max, which is something which you understand well. So you look at the hazard ratio of the top 25% versus the bottom 25%. There's certain hazard ratios which you actually can use also to do longevity planning and life expectancy. And then we can say, listen, you as a 43-year-old individual have the fitness of a 38, individual, right, based on VO2 max. But then we look at all other things of the body as well, your heart, your lungs, and all the various things. You look at pan tissue. And based upon that, we can then give you a very specific advice during every day, how to gain a day or lose a day. And through the day, we can actually tell you how far you stand in terms of achieving that benefit. You want to actually increase the gap, if you're on the right side, between biological age and chronological age. And then the question is, what should I do? What should I do to do it? And how do I make progress against that? And for that, you need a very fine-grained set of data, strong machine, and a very simple user interface to actually engage with. So that's what we will do there. So in terms of athletes, we will then be able to give them, in a very simple way, a sort of like a daily view, whether they have enhanced their fitness or not, or not. So we, of course, VO2 max is a very core element. Other element is, of course, strength training, where you have to look at the whole question of muscle mass and things like that as well. But bottom line is we make it simple, and we somewhat gamify it. And you want to have that real-time feedback so that the person can say, how did I do today? And and then also have the leaderboard and say, because maybe the two of you want to compete a bit, and see how do we do. So that's a lot, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense as to how it can be used. And then you have the coach coming involved, because the coach now takes it to the next level. So the coach actually is then the person which would look also at the metrics, just like a coach would use training peaks and say, hey, you know, based on where you stand with your exercise, you know, I would recommend you do A, B, C, D, because there's a lot of value, which coaches have lots of experience. I mean, they've taken people through many environments. They sometimes just know what works and doesn't.
Yeah.
What we now will do is give the coach the ability to have much finer metrics to monitor that person. And very important, also to monitor that person outside the training environment, sort of like in the daily environment, because ultimately daily lifestyle impact on that. So the trainer is not anymore only responsible for the training. You said once in one of, I think in one of your interviews, that it is actually nice that if you have the trainer at the gym, but maybe the days when they're not at the gym, that you can just check in with the individual and say, listen, hey, you know, remember that this is where we stand on the program. I notice A, B, C, D, all with your permission. Privacy, of course, is very important here, all of your permission. And based upon this, I would make the following recommended changes and almost keep you engaged. You know, and therefore, I think it can translate the relationship between trainer and trainee quite a lot, because you now have a 24/7 real-time connection with that person. And not only in the fitness domain, but also in other domains, including activity and sleep and those sort of things. And I think from that point of view, it could end up in a much more powerful relationship. And also, by the way, from a compliance point of view, big role of the trainers is to encourage and to make sure that people are just staying on it, you know. So that's the power of technology these days.
It's an exciting time to be a health coach. Scientists are uncovering the mysteries of the human microbiome. We're now gaining clarity into complex gut health issues we didn't even know about a decade ago. This means it's also a great time to become a gut health expert. Primal Health Coach Institute's Human Intestinal Microbiome and Health and Disease Specialist certification is for health coaches who want to help people heal the root problems of many of their health symptoms and conditions. A recent survey spanning 73,000 people across 33 countries found that nearly 40% of adults suffer from a gastrointestinal disorder. As an expert in gut health, you can offer unique programs and services to clients looking to manage or reverse a diagnosis such as an autoimmune disease, irritable bowel syndrome, or type 2 diabetes, or those who wish to improve their overall health. Gut health expert, cardiologist, and best-selling author Dr. William Davis teaches you everything you need to know about the human microbiome, including coaching tips to give you the confidence and credibility to support your clients and help them heal their guts, sleep better, gain more energy, and enjoy stronger immunity, balanced mood, smoother skin, and more. Find out more about how to become a gut health expert. Visit primalhealthcoach.com. Amazing. It's so amazing. My mind boggles at the math that has to go into creating some of this. So I was thinking about this because personally, I've been dragging my heels on like data. I on quantification. I've been dragging my heels. I'm unquantified. I feel like no, we need to connect our clients to their lived experience. But you're selling me on this because we can. One example that I think is really interesting is this bio age. Like you're able to pay attention to the real-time influences on them. And so when I think about this from the coaching relationship, sometimes a question that a coach will ask a client who's struggling with something, might ask, tell me about a time when this was working better for you, right? So that's a question a coach might ask. Tell me about a time when XYZ thing was working for you. And so now the client has to remember, well, before COVID, or before I changed jobs, or before, like before I had kids, or once they're trying to recollect a time when it was working for them. But now there's a data point that shows us.
You just have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I see incredible power. That's incredible to say, today was a good day. Today was not a good day. I'm using really simple language. And it's like, well, what were the inputs? Like, what was different between this day and this day? That's so interesting. Like to have a coaching conversation around that on Tuesday you improved your bio age, and then on Thursday knocked it down a peg. What happened between those 2 days? And then connecting the client's date, this really fascinating data point, to what they did, their behaviors, their lived experience, and being able to connect it that way. I'm actually incredibly becoming excited about it. So thank you.
Yeah, so I think the interesting element of that is that the computer is doing a lot of power. So just to give you an idea, so we have both causal and correlative modeling. So the causal modeling is looking, of course, at the physiology of the human. It's biochemistry. It is sort of like math, like physics and chemistry. The AI is the personalization component, and particularly connect the dots with habits. And I think that's where, and also constraints, because this is the big problem which you have is we have such a wide spectrum of in the individuals. If a trainer has to actually work with everyone and work with the 65-year-old lady and the 32-year-old whatever go-getter, and you have to sort of relate to their worlds all the time. It is good, intuition is good, and I know there's a lot of experience, but technology has a lot of power. And the question is, how do you make that power available? And how do you put that other layer of humanness on top of that? Because this is why we have both a solution for the individual themselves, as well as for a third party to help them. Because we understand that data alone is often not good enough for an individual to actually make the change. You have to have somebody, in the wings, not only from a motivational point of view, but also to help the person to understand some of the stuff. But what we then do is we enhance that understanding, and then we'll actually move the mind of the trainer to a higher level. So the trainer is not necessarily going double-clicking on some of the stuff which might be obvious in terms of the data and things like that, but can say, so if I stand back and I compare and I look at you, where are you going to fall down in 8 months from now? What is what's going to cause the problem? Because if I look at the past and the future, and that data, you need that higher metadata, that higher order data to do that. It's not the daily data. We all are focusing on, what is your lactate threshold and all those various things. And you go, it is important. Those are very important because you tweak. But then you have to also think about, where does that person want to be in life? And what is the ultimate goals? You just mentioned that, or that person. Yeah. And what is their fitness goals in the context of their personal goals, their health goals, and all the various things, and how do you marry them all? And health is so fundamental. I like the words which you use. You talk about health coaching, so and not fitness coaching, because it is really the more encompassing thing. And people is all about health. If we're not healthy, the world is all about people. And if people are not healthy, you have a very unhappy world, as we had in COVID.
And we've talked about how there can be a whole lot of not healthy in the fitness world if we're not careful, right? Yeah. By focusing on things that are almost antithetical to health. And I'm thinking in terms of the practical application of technology like this for the people that need us most. I'm not thinking in terms of high-level athletes looking to have a faster 100-meter. I'm thinking in terms of the person who's just been diagnosed with insulin resistance and is now identifying, if I don't do something, I'm going to be diabetic, right? And so one of the things that comes up in the health coaching realm a lot of times is access to blood work and helping the client understand what that really means, and how can we coach around behaviors and habits and choices that can move the needle on these things. But first of all, you got to go get blood drawn. It costs hundreds of dollars to do that. You can only do that so often. And what can we do in between that helps keep people motivated in terms of being able to move the needle on certain markers or certain data sets that might indicate that my cortisol levels are coming down because I don't have these big spikes in my heart rate, or maybe my resting heart rates come down a little bit, or maybe my body temperature, so I would love some thoughts in terms of, have you considered that? The people that really need us most is a much larger swath of the population that are not these elite athletes. This is the average population that is now dealing with metabolic health markers. And how can using these wearables and aggregating this data help a client help help the coach, help the client say, hey, in between, hey, we got this blood work. We're not going to be pulling more blood work for another 3 months. Let's see what we can, the idea of gamifying. How can we sort of move the needle on other certain non-intrusive metrics that we can kind of say, hey, over the last 3 weeks, we've noticed this have come down or that's gone up. And what behaviors and habits and choices can we tie that to? Or at the very least, shows the evidence of the recommended or the behaviors, habits, and choices that clients been working on the last 3 weeks seems to be moving the needle. In addition to all the subjective markers. Hey, I'm sleeping better. I feel less bloated. I don't have headaches, things of that nature.
I must appoint you in my company because you exactly explain what we're doing. Or thank you very much for that. No, I think you really get it. So for us, yes, GenPop, we are focusing on not on the 1%. Whilst we have solutions for the elite athlete, and we should have that as well. Most of our focus are actually on preventative health, and it's actually on the prevention and the dealing with chronic disease. Because these are sort of like all, and whether you talk about just cardiovascular, which we all know is one of the biggest killers, but you also talk about metabolic disease, which is of course a huge thing, cancer. Maybe I also noted that you pick it up. I actually had cancer, prostate cancer, something like 5-6 years ago. And fortunately, I picked it up early. And I then, I changed my lifestyle quite a bit. I moved to a vegan-centric diet, just by chance. I'm not promoting anything like that. I call myself more flexitarian than vegan, if you like. So I do still focus on, having fish every now and then, some good, marine-based omega-3s and things coming in as well, but largely vegan-based. And then we've analyzed my bioage. And, just to tell you what we've done is we've done even trials in LifeQ, where we took, a range of population, old and young, sick and healthy, male, female, etc. And then we did some gene sequencing on them. And then we did some blood work on them and took something like 16 vials of blood on everyone, just to give an idea. Wow. It's almost like the old blood bag. And then we did, of course, a lot of monitoring with the wearables. And based upon that, then we've actually checked and calibrated, make sure that our bioage calculations on pan tissue or holistically, correlates with what's called methylation-based, sort of like aging clocks. People are known like Hallworth clock or the Levine clock, or some people the Grimm age, the Fenno age. There's lots of different clocks which are being designed based on specific epigenome and genetic compositions, which are actually in the human. And then there's also blood marker clocks. So even though based on your lipid profiles, there's certain ways or established ways to actually look at your aging based upon that. And then we've correlated that now with the wearable derived metrics. And you use the word non-intrusive. I use the word ambulatory. It has to be not known. It has to happen as soon as you require an individual to do anything, compliance just go down. It has to just work in the background all along. It's extremely important. And then the wearable also look at the behavior, because there's a lot of behavior which feed these wearable markers. So, to get a good VO2 max or a resting heart rate or heart rate variability, there's something which happened to actually cause that. So the wearable is actually able to track both. It actually look a lot what's happening inside the body, but because it's always on your body, there's a lot of analysis being done in terms of your movement, your sleep, and all the various things. A lot of our mental metrics are very much, focused on sleep architecture. For instance, we would look at REM latency. That's the time from your beginning, from sleep onset to your first REM phase. Or we looked at different movement of heart rate variability in very specific sleep phases, because these different things which will actually indicate your sleep restoration versus your sleep relaxation. So you can actually dial into it, and all that information is available now based on, if you apply this on top. And think 3, 4 years, 5 years ago, you couldn't find it. So having that information, that powerful information, suddenly you now can go to a trainer and say, listen, hey, I can see you had a very relaxed sleep, but you haven't restored. So why is that you have relaxed and restored? Or let's say you have a propensity to it's based on your genetic profile that you are higher, kind of now, let's talk about the older person, Alzheimer's. So you know that there's certain things, certain elements of sleep, which is very important for you to at least delay or deal with it a little bit, from that perspective. So it provides you with a total different coaching profile around people, because you can now have a view and sort of almost mine into different fields. And then when you talk to the person and say, listen, yeah, you asked me to talk about this, but I see that. Are you aware of that? And how do we actually connect the dots? So I think the interpretation, so it's not about biometrics per se. It's about what you do and use computing power to actually get value from that biometrics and understanding from that biometrics and look at the picture as a whole. It's almost for me like a step change to where you have just a few basic, I'm not speaking negatively. If you talk about the first chest straps, which you got, and you get heart rate and all the various things, it was a fantastic start. This is just taking it, it's actually orders of magnitude up in terms of what it covers. And also very important, what you mentioned is in between these, so we don't diagnose. We have a very good suspicion if something has happened, but we don't diagnose. But the directional trend in between those monitors, if you want to do, if you have a specific thing, even if you talk about a fitness person, let's say you take a VO2 max test and you want to see, I'm going to do another one in a year. I don't want to do one of those every day, as we all know. I want to do another one in another year. But how do I trend? What's my expectation? I must almost be able to say, when I move into that next VO2 max trend test, I will be surprised if it's not X. Because if it was Y and this is what happened in between, it should be X. And that type of information. So it is that in-between checking, even when you do treatment. When you go and do a treatment for a specific metabolic disorder, and you are, let's say either a medical, therapy or a drug or whatever type of thing. Yes, the doctor will tell you, come back in a month's time or 3 months' time, I'll put you another MRI or another, CAT scan or, X-ray. But in the meantime, at least I don't want to steer totally blind. And that's where we talk about the car driving up from Florida up north. Drive blind, but in the meantime, you can have actually a very interesting dashboard, not only with a check engine light coming on, but like the more modern cars, you can see what happened in a lot of parts of the engine and the transmission and things like that. This car has a lot of things in the engine and transmission that you can keep your eyes on as well. It is just a total different driving experience. And by the way, also then in terms of keeping this car in top shape, whereas previously the cars maybe you were lucky to get 100,000 miles. Now cars can get 500,000 miles. Yeah. Just because you have different views, you can preempt something if something goes wrong, and body is the same. Yeah. Nothing. And the thing, it's continuous monitoring now. It's not the sporadic, or first of all, wait until I have trouble, take the car to the garage. You are actually all the way, you have the focus on it and you can tune it as you go. Last point, which I want to make, for me, a very important thing is the experimentation. Because there is certainly, we don't know it all. There's certainly a way how you have to dial into the optimum mix for you. So yes, what are the things which you can play with? You can play with movement, activity, exercise, fitness, sleep. You talk about stress therapies, heat therapies, which is quite an important one. Things which can change sometimes even environment, because it also have an impact. We all know the importance, and that's, I also heard you guys talking about it in times of COVID about it. The question of friendship, of the whole social network, to have your sense of purpose, all that stuff is very important. But then you combine it sometimes with nutraceuticals or pharmaceuticals even. It depends on how, if you really have a disease, but particularly nutraceuticals, there's a lot of people which try a lot of different things, to optimize. How do you really know that it's the right recipe? It's the right number for you? I can tell you, for me, many of the if I would take the prescribed level of drug, it just makes me a miserable person. And then I just, start saying, well, half of that drug size is it just feels good. But if I don't have something which really can confirm it to me, I'm still just taking a guess, So the more information you have, and that's exactly where you pointed out, Laura, in the interim, to see, wow, this is my sweet spot where I have to be on this. And it's my best combination because, I always say, be inspired by others, but don't compare yourself with others. And therefore, make sure from that perspective that you find your own solution, but you need data. I don't want to use the word that. You need insight. You need a sort of a view. And technology is there today. Technology was not there 10 years, 20 years ago to do that. And I can tell you it's going to transform. And it can transform coaching as well, because coaches will not become data givers. Because often coaches can say, well, let's go and look through, whatever, let's measure this. And I give you a very nice report telling you A, B, C, D. That's coach 1.0. You have to go to, where do I go from here? How do I leverage this new information which is coming available? And it's just available on an affordable consumer device. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see this really transforming the coaching realm. I'm thinking through, sometimes, for example, you might onboard a client, and this is going back into the olden days, analog, and you might say, as part of an onboarding gift, I'm going to send you this book or this recipe app or whatever. We send resources. Resources is something that coaches are really welcome to share with clients. Can you imagine a coaching relationship in the not too distant future where it's like, as part of signing on with me for my coaching program, I'm going to send you this wearable that connects to this platform, and you and I together are going to be very clear on watching your data move and how your behavior is impacted. Like it can become folded into the coaching product in some ways. That'd be a really interesting way of using it.
Yeah.
And it was also interesting to learn from that, Erin. So I think what I will do, sort of like, anyway, before the end of Q3, maybe I will send you some devices and dashboards so that you can actually see it, and to learn from you, to say, listen, well, by using it, this is my impressions or my understanding of what we think we can do, because we want to also help building that further higher layer of interpretation on these things, which is a little bit more specific to the use case, because for use cases, you can't have a general dashboard for all use cases. You have to sort of like put another layer onto that, and that's going to be the fun part. We are building now dashboards. Just give you an idea from the elderly, from fall, not only fall detection. I mean, fall detection is extremely important for the elderly because we know that, but fall prevention, fall prediction, all these things become quite important, to be able to say to the caregiver, listen, Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so woke up this morning, based on the physiology, is more likely to fail today. Please be, extra careful and watch that person a little bit. Maybe tomorrow they're going to have a different meal the previous night or different whatever, and they may be a little bit stronger, less worry, whatever type of thing. But that's for instance on the elderly side. If you think of it as a sort of a special use case, we talk about frontline workers, people in the ambulance drivers, fire machine drivers, police people. We expect them always to be there, but they sit in cars. Do you know how metabolically more disadvantaged a policeman is versus a everyday human? Because you would think that they are fit guys and they sit most of the time, and they're in stressful environments. It is you can go analyze strokes and heart attacks and things. So to pick up those things in them, is extremely important. As a use case, I just use another example. So there's so many places where you can fundamentally, other than the fitness environment, where health coaching is way beyond fitness coaching, and where you go into that other areas.
What I love about this too is, a lot of health coaches today they graduate from a program, they've gotten out, they've helped a few people, but they still sort of struggle to find their identity and find a way to articulate their value. And they keep tagging back to, well, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a dietitian. I'm a health coach. I took a course that took me 6 months or a year. Who am I? How do I articulate my value and kind of what I'm doing here? And I heard you say it earlier, and it's, look, we're not diagnosing anything. So you don't have to be a doctor. Okay. We're not prescribing anything. You don't have to be a doctor or a dietitian. Health coaching works in the realm of wellness. And that's what this tracking is designed to do, right? Is to kind of pick up these various data points, whatever it is. And I would imagine if a coach specialized in a particular area, right, focused on this is what we recommend to health coaches, focus on solving a problem for a specific person, right, by, insert whatever your program is. And perhaps a wearable and this kind of tracking is helpful in order to be able to collect data that's relevant to that, first of all, behaviors, right? In terms of how much movement are they doing? What time are they going to bed? That's a big one. I think for a lot of people tending to stay up too late, or, whatever the case may be, and being able to now say, look, we've got some trackable data. I'm not diagnosing anything, but let's talk about this. Tell me, it looks like you were able to sleep a little better here because this is what this data, what was happening that week? What did you do differently? That allows you to have a more pinpointed conversation that goes into bringing your program alive and adding so much more context and, I guess, personalization, customization to it.
I think there's another way, another sort of use case that actually talks to this one. And that is, with more higher interpreted data, you have the ability that, and I want to be careful of my word, with less qualified or less trained caregivers can actually give you the same quality than a most experienced GP. So for instance, if you go to a GP today with, say, doctor, I have congested chest, and, maybe then the doctor said, well, maybe it could be pneumonia or it could be COVID, whatever, let's go and do an x-ray, blah, blah, blah. And then they diagnose, but you only had symptoms, and the symptoms which you take. So you think of this also generating symptoms, electronic symptoms, views.
Mm-hmm.
And but this one actually feels where your brain don't feel. It actually looks where your brain can't sense, because your brain is limited ultimately, and particularly when a disease is slowly in onset, you don't even know that, because you don't have relativity to compare. This thing actually can monitor small changes all the time, and it look all the way. So what you now have is maybe 40-50% of the staff, which previously would go to the GP, maybe just a nurse or a clinical technician or a physician assistant can actually deal with it, because it's better information, it's better interpreted, and therefore you actually need less experience to actually make an immediate impact. And if you think of health coaches, sometimes they want to compare themselves with the more advanced trained, clinicians and things like that. With more powerful data, you can be as effective or even more than them. And I think this is what data can, and interpreted data. I want to use the word insights, not data, what insights can do, because I think people are sort of like almost over their ears with data. The question is, how do you make it easy? Yeah.
This is so exciting. You just got me very excited, because what you're talking about is another dimension of symptomatology, right? So this idea that I don't feel well, like the sense of not feeling as well as one could, right? So this is, to me, the domain of the health coach. Like I used to be vibrant. I used to be energetic. Maybe this is chalking this up to aging, but maybe there's something else happening under the hood that hasn't quite gotten to the level yet where I got to go to the doctor. It's percolating, and you're catching it before it's a true symptom that would take you to the doctor. I feel like that's exciting to me, because to your point, it's like, if they don't have to go to the doctor, then a health coach can help you before it gets to that point. And so you can return your back to that sort of baseline homeostatic feeling of feeling good, which is your birthright, ultimately.
What's interesting, I mean, we are now 8 billion people on the planet, and, courtesy good medicine, you find that through the epigenome, the relevant, the amount of genome compromised individuals are just increasing in the world, which actually, and the healthcare system just can't keep up. We all know that. I think, I can't remember the number, but somewhere, if you take from in the US, I think from 1960 to until now, the healthcare as a percentage of GDP went up from something like 4 or 5% to something like 18, 16, 80%. In the world, 2 to 10, 11, 12%. If you look at the total expenditure on healthcare, I think it's up to 1960, from history up to 670, I think, a little bit. All the expenditure in a few decades thereafter, more money was spent than in the entire history of health, type of thing. So you sit with a situation that the healthcare system cannot cope with it anymore. You have to have a different level of, or different number of intermediaries, which can help bridging the gap to extremes to all this. And that is where, in that sort of the whole area where consumer health or clinical health is getting sort of like overlapped. You need to have, and that's, I think, a place where coaches are going to have to play a big role. It's not only in the preemptive and preventative of this all, but it is just because there's not going to be enough GPs. I mean, right. You're in Canada. How long do you wait for a GP appointment sometimes?
Right.
You know what I'm talking about.
With the UK, we need a release valve, right? We need a release valve to help release the pressure on, the countries like where Aaron lives, or in the UK where it's universal health care and people can't. But here in the US, you can see a doctor, but you're going to get 8 minutes.
No, by the way, look at the forecast for 2030, 2035 in terms of GP shortage in the US. I live with you here, Laura, so I know.
I have talked to, so my role at our school is admissions director. Aaron, this week, I spoke to 2 MDs, family physicians, that are leaving.
Yeah.
They're leaving medicine. They want to get into more of this lifestyle. And I'm like, okay, so first of all, you don't have to give up your licensure. There's other ways to practice these days. I think what they want to do is they want to exit this sort of sick care. Insurance is the one actually driving the bus system. And they want to understand health coaching, and they know that they can serve a broader population when they're not stuck within their state boundaries with their licensure. So they want to add health coaching to what they're doing. I talked to 2 this week alone.
I speak to many of them now. I mean, it's just amazing. I can actually tell you different stories about what I can tell you now. You will find that with COVID and remote and virtual care sort of like emerging, you have the ability to touch really wide populations with better technology and almost have the same impact with less qualified people and achieving the same. Yeah. So there is that the whole new sector almost evolving, a new area of first triage of people with issues, whether it's mental or physical, etc. And the professional that you're going to have there is going to be a different professional. Also, because now it's not the question that, have I studied 7 years? I think it's extremely important to have those doctors there to deal with their difficult cases.
Absolutely.
But it's a waste for that doctor with that training to do something which a much less qualified person can do with better data, with better insights and data. And I think that's where we are moving into at this point in time.
Love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So tell us, so first of all, when is it coming available? How do people kind of check it out? Where should they go? What kind of device? So give us just the 411 on the logistics of this before we let you go.
Okay, good. So I can talk maybe about 1 or 2 devices, because some of the device companies do want to keep things a little bit under wraps, if you like. Right. But there will be LifeQ apps will be available on the Android and iOS store. First of all, for free, towards I would say September, you will probably see it. And then later it will be a sort of a small, we will probably have a subscription thing of something like $4 a month or something like that for subscribing for the more, sort of like the health focused, versus the regular focus of an app. I would imagine, I don't think they will worry if I'm saying it at this point in time. My sense is that we will first sort of trial it, do the beta with Motorola devices, just for starters. And then there will be other devices following in November, and probably again in February, and then in April. So I know of different devices which will then, so you will then have the device. And in some cases, some of the new devices will have probably powered by LifeQ on the box. And then you will have the ability to download our app alongside the app of the device maker. So, and then that app will then just give you that different view, whereas the device maker will give you still the the basic view which you get today. So my sense is, in terms of commercially available, towards the latter part of Q4, but certainly in terms of for people which already have some LifeQ enabled devices, we will do over-the-air updates of those devices, and they will be able to then link the LifeQ app to it and get that information. And then at the same token, all our dashboards then suddenly become available. Now, that's not to the consumer. That is now for the coach or the clinical professional or the caregiver or the loved one for the elderly, but where you have a third party with the permission of the individual, giving them access. And the power of this technology is you can have hundreds of people looking into the same physiology. So if it's elderly people, they might have a cardiologist, they might have a GP, they might have a caregiver, they might have a child, all of them, and they can have all different views. And you can tune it to what is relevant to that person, so that you don't create anxiety and you just leave it in the environment of what they can deal with.
So exciting.
I know. I like it. So what is there a website? Do people go to something like lifeq.com to keep tabs on this?
LifeQ.com. And it's already it's quite a colorful website, but we are adding, and there's these very nice brochures and videos, so which is always all forward looking. People will look at it and say, but this is fantastic, where can I get it? And then they say, I can't, it's not yet available. But you will already see it, because we've launched it at HIMSS. The solutions. We were at the American Academy for Sleep Medicine in Indianapolis, I think 4 weeks ago about. We're going to focus more on the cardiology side at the AAC, the American Academy of Cardiology conference next year in February. Then we have people at certain digital insurance conferences. So the application of this technology is very wide.
Right.
I'm looking forward to go to the sports medicine conference with this as well, but there we want to first have our total advanced coaching program ready, which we are building on, which integrate health. That's a very important thing. It integrate health into the usual stress and recovery sort of dominated process, which are followed by some wearables, and which I'm not talking negatively at all about. I'm very glad about it. All what I want to say is we just add the health layer and add that additional context layer. And the very important thing, add the mental layer on top of it. Because mental issues are a big thing, on top of physiological issues, sometimes very much integrated.
Oh my gosh, we could talk for hours. This is so great. Well, we look forward to checking this out in September. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us, I think this is really cool. And I think it's kind of a next level coaching. So thank you.
And I look forward to also get some stuff sent over to you to get your feedback, particularly to how do we tweak some of our dashboards for your coaching world to be more relevant to that. That would be quite helpful to get that feedback.
That'd
We'd
be
love
great.
that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Laurie.
Thanks, guys. Thank you very much, Laura. Thanks, Erin, for your time. I appreciate it.
You bet.
This podcast was brought to you by Primal Health Coach Institute. To learn more about how to become a successful health coach, get in touch with us by visiting primalhealthcoach.com/call. Or if you're already a successful health coach, practitioner, influencer, or thought leader with a thriving business and an interesting story, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us at hello@primalhealthcoach.com and let us know why we need to interview you for Health Coach Radio. Thanks for listening.